Welcome back to Reform Millennials, a podcast where we discuss the intersection of markets, politics, and pop culture. Please remember that the content of this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should be considered financial or tax advice. Please consult a professional before you make any investment decisions.
Oh, hello, Joel. Good to see you twice in 1 week. What a treat.
Honestly, there's no one I'd rather spend my Friday afternoon with.
Yeah, it's like we're such nerds. I'm like, before we got on, I was just like, man, I'm so tired. What is going on with everything? Do you feel it in your sector too? Or is this just like a political thing for me? Like, I actually feel like I cannot catch a breath in these past few weeks.
It's earnings season, but I would say when you get back from summer, things get heavy and folks want to get stuff done before Christmas because then they're going to leave you alone. And there is something to be said about, like, you always post this on your socials that it's time to get organized and stuff like that. And I think January often is that time for men. Women maybe have they address this more frequently. But the reality is that in my industry, people try to clean everything up prior to Christmas and after summer. And we have a very, very impactful and important quarter to talk about with regards to like AI, CapEx, that sort of stuff. So markets are very volatile at the moment. So it's busy. It's not busy like it is for you though. And I'm definitely, I have a little bit more energy coming into Friday than you do. And I think where I'd like to start is I'd like to hear your kind of key takeaways from this budget. I've gotten, and I want to pump your tires really quickly because I've gotten 10 emails from banks, accounting firms, what you need to look for in this budget, and they send it out within 15 minutes of it coming out. So it's like basically AI crawled the document, 470-page document, and sent out some slop. And that's what it is. It's total slop. Yours, and I've gotten a preview, is fantastic. It's really well organized, and it has some bite to it. And it gives you like a framing of thinking, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. My tired eyes are justified in that context. Yeah, I think it's so funny. I'm always trying to fight against the grain because I think there's such a tendency or temptation to just like pop this into AI and be like, tell me what's important. I like to do things a little differently, but that means that people have to wait a little longer, but that's okay. It's worth the wait.
It is. I'm going to read about this all weekend, and I'd much prefer getting it now than necessarily chomping at some AI slop that I had to read from an accounting firm. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm happy to get into sort of the key takeaways that sort of jumped out at me, initially, and then over the past few days as I've had time to unpack things. I guess I would say large deficit for sure, 78.3 billion, which is notably double what we thought we were going to see in the 2024 fall economic statement, which was, if anybody remembers, when Chrystia Freeland basically like resigned and was the beginning of the end of Trudeau era. This was December 16th of 2024. That's really the last formal fiscal update that we got from the sitting government, the Liberals. And then, of course, the election in 2025, earlier in 2025 here, disrupted that. So this is really the first line of sight that we're getting formally to our federal finances. So $78.3 billion deficit, definitely larger than we thought it was going to be. I've been getting in sort of like little tiffs with all of my conservative friends because, of course, it's not something like, but deficits are not something that conservatives like to see. And of course, this deficit is significantly bigger than we've seen in the past couple of years. But I'm at least somewhat encouraged that the deficit is not on planting 8 million trees with $3 billion allocated towards it. Like, I'm at least excited that some of what the Carney government has decided to put money into could very well manifest into positive investments down the road. I'm not sure if it was him that first, or if it was he who first said it, but Matt Gurney from The Line, who's just a great reporter, he and Jen Gerson run The Line. They have a podcast as well, and it's a shout out to them. They're so great. But Matt said something really interesting in terms of analyzing the budget that I want to reflect here. He said, this is a generational budget, and I'm afraid that it's going to take a generation for us to realize the impacts of it. So I guess from a top level, we're seeing a large deficit. We're seeing significant spending. We're seeing our debt increase We are not seeing anything in this budget that goes directly towards affordability measures or anything that's going to help pocketbooks at the outset. But we do see sizable investments in defense, for example, artificial intelligence, a little bit of a new clean energy strategy with some positive news there. We can get into sort of the nitty gritty of what it all means, but I would say that one of the most fascinating things that I think has transpired from Mark Carney and the allure that he has had and the attraction that boomers have to him is, and others too, I won't just say this about boomers, but when you really like somebody and you have decided that that person's intelligent and amazing, there's virtually nothing they can do that will convince you otherwise, even if their actions are not necessarily in alignment with that characterization. I think of this budget as being that way as well. The country has already decided that Mark Carney and the Liberals in this new era is amazing and fantastic and so fiscally responsible that we seem a little bit more willing as a society to take this budget at face value as being awesome. Like, just trust Mark Carney. He knows what he's doing. And that could very well be true. But I think some of the fundamentals that we're seeing in budget are not, I would say it's marginally better than we've seen, but nothing that is going to sort of turn the trajectory of Canada around in the next 18 to 24 months. So that's my high level take on it. Curious of yours as well.
So
and then we can
so this is like a generational turning point.
Well, just like a generational budget, like nothing like we've ever seen before. Investments and, and this word investment as well has been thrown around of like the characterization of the spending as investments, because if you're making an investment, it's not as bad if it's a deficit. But if you're spending, then it's bad if it's a deficit. So lots of like political language like that floating around.
Of course. It's all about framing. I suppose there's like a little bit of truth to that. I think from my perspective, and I would say the broader market's perspective, the currency traded down post budget release, deficit release, and we'll call it key metrics. What does that tell you? Does that mean that Canada became a more attractive place to invest versus the US dollar? Absolutely not. However, I would like to point out a few things that I think market participants do care about. And there's a few little tidbits here and there from a market structure perspective and like the TSX composition that I think are a little bit interesting. I have been, for our last 6 conversations, talking about the carbon cap needing to be removed. It is an enormous mistake that it was ever even brought to the table. And I think that from a generational budget perspective, let's say you use that framing, the carbon cap being removed is a generational change from what we got so lucky to experience for a decade. And now we're shifting away from it. So it's as though we are now changing gears back to the way we used to handle things back in the 90s. So in early 2000s. So, okay, yes, agreed. I would also say that there is a lot of very interesting verbiage around the handling of stablecoins, crypto, things that are very forward-looking and innovative that I really appreciate, and I think gives investors and just market participants a how do I put this? A new view and it gives them an appreciation for who's in charge in our country. People that are open to new ideas earlier than what would have traditionally been considered. And I think that is very important, and that context matters. So that signal, I think, was really important, and they did a good job of doing. But rolling back to the items that I think are perhaps things that we should be pinpointing, I mean, from a political perspective, I care very little. Obviously, I care that who wins, who loses, and the winner, what they want to accomplish. I was a little bit disappointed with the fact that they promised all of this stuff around housing affordability, and they effectively delivered on 1.5 of them.
Well, our housing minister is a former municipal politician from Vancouver, and we know how housing is in Vancouver. So I was never holding my breath when he came into that role, no shade, that we were going to see transformational change.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also not a big believer in government solutions for market problems, and we have an enormous supply issue, and they're trying to tackle it from a demand, and it's always been the case. It's just like, oh, we're gonna. we're going to remove GST and like that's going to drop prices. Anyway, that was a little bit of a disappointment for me, but at least they're doing something about it. Now, on the demand side, they're slowing down or putting I think, some visibility into what to expect from a population growth perspective. And I think that goes a long ways. So having some idea of what we should expect, and maybe you can tell me this, is this normal that we put out a guidance on population and immigration control? Is that normal?
I think it is normal. I mean, budget always includes a lot of different economic indicators, not just on what you're spending, but like what we're expecting to bring in for revenue, what we're expecting GDP growth, CPI, employment, because unemployment and employment is a huge driver of GDP growth and the way in which that integrates. And GDP growth assumptions have a lot to do with how much debt is manageable for us, what we believe growth expectations are going to be, which feeds into personal income tax and corporate income tax profits and the sort of investment outlook in that way. So yeah, I think it is. I mean, they always do talk about immigration and population growth, but I think that uniquely in this budget, people are starting to connect the dots between the pressures that we see on our infrastructure and our public systems and the immigration ethos that we've had, for the past 10 plus years, and how we reconcile those policies in a way that sort of gives us a sense of, is our immigration policy and our approach to immigration going to be helping or hurting our prospect of economic growth? So I do think, there's certainly more attention being paid to it this budget because of how in vogue that topic is now, but it is always, I think, a major consideration, or should be, for governments that are building these fiscal plans.
Okay, that's a great answer. The thing that I want to kind of drive towards is also, we'll call the expenses side of this budget, where they're going to kind of drive the bus for certain parts of the market. And for the longest time, our federal government has had an enormous hand in the energy market. They have not allowed for it to just operate based on opportunity. It's very influenced by egress, basically how we get our things that we pull out of the ground to market. Egress is like your transportation and shipping, etc. That it seems like it's being reformed a little bit from the top down, and I'm excited to see that there's a step function change there. I am a little bit concerned about what does strengthening methane regulations mean. I don't understand what the expansion of carbon capture and the utilization of storage technologies is going to be. I do believe that is going to answer a few questions in terms of this is promoting some technological investment, that sort of thing. And I do think that the carbon cap removal isn't just great for oil and gas, but it enables very energy intensive industry to be moved to Canada from tariffed countries that America has very clearly attacked, or made it quite obvious to them that they want to bring this back home. And this is never more evident than with steel and aluminum. For those that don't know, aluminum takes an enormous amount of energy to produce. And a good reason as to why we have actually exported a ton of rare earth manufacturing and refining out of our country and more broadly into the United States is largely because of the capital that it takes and the energy intensity and the carbon. What have we done? We've exported that to China, we've exported it to India, and they've now created a price structure so that they can hold it and wield it on us when they want to negotiate trade terms. I do think that moving forward, we're going to see some of that reverse back to North America specifically, and having a carbon capture or a carbon cap removed on this industry enables us to utilize our very cheap energy to produce locally minerals and products, batteries, magnets, really important material and industrial equipment that needs to be sold into the United States, into Mexico, and more broadly into Europe. And that is a very good change. I personally view that as being just this tremendous shift. Now, investment attraction and how this impacts us over the next 3 years, I'm curious to see what you're hearing And because I know for myself, it certainly makes me more interested in a part of the Canadian market that I haven't been for some time.
Yeah, so I'll go back to just sort of talking about the energy side of things. So, the important thing to note on the emissions cap is that it wasn't fully implemented at this point. So, the signal that we are seeing in budget 2025, which we don't have, we don't have confirmation yet, but they seem to indicate that they are going to be walking away from the oil and gas emissions cap, which is definitely good news for Alberta. They've said that they're going to do some other things, though, in terms of addressing emissions and that side of things through their new climate competitiveness strategy. So we see that they're likely going to walk away from the oil and gas emissions cap, which is, I think, good if they do that. We also do see, though, that they've made commitments to reform industrial carbon pricing, strengthen methane regulations, and go at the energy sector in different ways there. And I think that could be good or bad. I think part of what budget 2025 doesn't do in the sphere of energy attraction and energy and investment attraction is provide the level of certainty that is required. Because to say that you're going to walk away from one thing and then adjust 3 or 4 other things without providing the specifics on what you're adjusting those things to be, I think does leave a fair bit of uncertainty in the market when it comes to that stuff. And so hopefully the federal government and the stakeholders that are concerned and impacted by these signals can sort of get some clarity on that in the next little bit. But again, I come back to, these are good signals, but unless we do, there's a difference between politics and saying things and the regulatory and uncertainty that comes with something not yet actually having dotted the I's and crossed the T's. And so I think that level of regulatory uncertainty, it's a good sign. And I would agree with you that it does seem like the Carney government is looking to signal that they'd like to reset the relationship on this file. But I think I do want to wait and see on what actually comes of some of this before we sort of take those commitments all the way to the bank. And I'm sure many in the energy sector are looking at that as well. Of course, some positive advancements on the CCUS side, the carbon credit that we, or the investment tax credit that we knew was coming and needed details on, and these types of things as well. On the investment attraction side of things, we've definitely seen that continued investment in the Critical Mineral Sovereign Fund. We've seen continued investment in some of these venture and growth funds, and some investments in AI infrastructure as well. And one important aspect, I think, of that is allowing the Canada Infrastructure Bank to make investments in AI infrastructure. Just to give you a sense, the CIB, Canada Infrastructure Bank, has a mandate to invest in major projects and projects that are going to help build Canada, and to expand that mandate to be able to include that AI side of things, I think is a good thing. Usually they were investing in like ag and energy and those types of projects. So that's good. I think they're getting about $10 billion more as well, if I read that correctly in the budget. So that's good. So yeah, I guess I would just say that I don't know that budget 2025 necessarily removes the regulatory uncertainty entirely, but it does signal that there seems to be a willingness to at least not want to be seen as like oil and gas, energy hating oversight. And again, who knows how that's going to shake out, but I'm thinking that that's cause for some optimism, but we have to see what actually happens in the regulatory rollout.
So I want to skip ahead here. I want to talk about the defense and military briefly. I think a lot of people are going to like hand clap this one.
Yeah.
And they're going to say, you know what, this is great. We're rebuilding our military. What's your thoughts on that? And then I'll give you mine.
So I think that this is a really positive investment if they are able to fulfill it, and that'll be the part 2 of my answer. If they're able to fulfill it, it will represent, by my calculations, about a 40% increase in defense, including sort of this defense industrial strategy that we saw over the past couple of months come out. I think that part of the struggle with anything in government is that there's a willingness to allocate funding toward it. And that's what we have to remember as well. Budget is basically saying, because governments, which is the executive arm of government, have to get approval from the legislative arm of government on where they're allowed to spend. So it's basically like you're going to mom and dad being like, hey, I'd like to have this much money to spend in each of these ministries on these things. Whether or not you spend that money, whether you spend below that money or can get that money out the door, is a matter of state capacity. And I think part of the struggle in our defense and military sphere is that state capacity aspect. It's one thing to make the funds available. It's another thing to deploy them quickly and efficiently and in a way where it actually does represent an increase in spending. From a notional perspective, it is good that Carney has committed to meeting our 2% NATO target, and he's actually gone a step further by saying that he will meet that 5% target over the next decade, 5% of GDP over the next decade, which is good. But again, I want to see how that money disseminates throughout the economy or throughout the sector rather before I'm like clapping my hands too hard about it, because state capacity is not the strong suit of the federal government or any government in recent years. I
completely agree with everything that you're saying. I want to point one thing out though. This used to be the benefit of being the United States' best friend, is that we didn't need to run a defense spend over a 5-year period of $80 billion. We didn't need to. We could just keep it around 1%, not even think about it. It's kind of like people that live in your parents' basement. They don't have to worry about a mortgage. They don't have to insure the house. It was kind of nice not having to do that. And now we have at least in the next couple of years, we have a president that has taken that very seriously. And you know what? If I was an American, rightfully so. However, as a Canadian, I'm kind of sad about it. I just want to point that one specific piece out.
I have one more thing to say about that, unless you're going to talk about defense.
No, go ahead.
I would add one more nuance to that. It's as though you're living in your parents' basement, but before it was like a very high income neighborhood that was relatively safe. I think we're now living in a neighborhood that's not the best part of town, which is this sort of characteristic of seeing global powers like Russia and China. We're coming out of a unipolar world where the United States was the world power. We're entering a multipolar world. So yes, I agree with you. Our relationship with the United States is important, but I think also we do have sort of we're quite close to Russia, as we're talking about, right? Like we have our own thoughts on that as well. And there's other threats that have emerged that were not threats in, just 10, 15 years ago in the way they are today.
I guess shifting gears a little bit, we did get a question in, and I think it was actually quite prescient and a good one. And without reading the entire thing, the person asks, the structure, or rather, I feel like our budget doesn't reflect our reality. What about the focus of our system, the structure of innovation, our culture, and the way our institutions operate? Our system doesn't seem to mirror the progress we truly need. And he didn't give additional context to that. I'm representative of culture. I think that Canada struggles with this a lot. Me specifically addressing that point. We are a country of 40-ish million people that is spread across the second largest land mass in the world. And culture in Alberta is different from culture in Vancouver. The culture of Toronto is different from the culture of Vancouver. The culture of Toronto is different from the culture of Alberta. And I think that this is oftentimes a good reason why we have so much political divide in our country. We have sections of and more broadly across the country itself that have just different ways of life, different ways of earning an income, and a dependence on certain parts of our economy that are just tremendously different than each specific area. And that, I think, contributes to that divide. And so crafting a budget that is going to scratch everybody's backs is challenging. And also politically, I think it's not in line, right? You have a population density in certain regions that don't necessarily pull their weight with regards to productivity and GDP growth and contribution from tax that need to be satisfied. So you have this fracturing. And I don't see in this budget a commitment to equalization in terms of productivity. It certainly isn't being like, okay, You know what I see? I see somebody who is clearly a star. We're going to fund that. Currently, that's not what's happening. And certainly they're scratching as many itches as possible, but it doesn't seem like they are directionally supporting innovation and the areas that have momentum. Because I know for a fact, as a portfolio manager and investor, you know exactly what you do. You let your winners ride, and then you fund them, and then you scrap the areas that are dead. But that is very difficult to do politically because it doesn't necessarily work. So I don't think that that perfectly answers the person's question, but I think it was important for me to say because this comes back to what we often talk about in our conversations, the disconnect and the major issue we have in this province or in this country, because it's just a reality that we are constantly scratching an itch or scratching the backs of people that aren't perhaps pulling their weight. And that's because there's just so much political value to doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always the struggle that's been a struggle in Canada since, 1867, before 1867. Like this is just a founding struggle of our federation, and having such a large country that operates in the way that we do in a parliamentary system. I would say that I think this person, if I can sort of assume, is this budget maybe doesn't propose the sort of breadth and depth of change that's required. I think it's interesting, and it kind of mirrors what you were talking about earlier, Joel, in terms of it can't really serve everybody. I think this is part of the struggle and why people on the sort of conservative side of things take such issue with the large deficits and the heavy government involvement when it comes to energy regulation, for example, or getting in the muck of places that are either constitutionally supposed to sit with the provinces or on issues that would just be better handled by governments that are closer to the people. I think that does become problematic when, you have government that becomes big for political reasons because you can directly have a hand in awarding money in this area or picking winners and losers in this area. And that's why I think that doing that is so dangerous, is because once you start, it's very difficult to stop because your political fortunes are so tied to it. So I would agree with the person who popped in that question and sort of what you're saying, Joel. I just think that the fundamental change that I think Canada needs to address when it comes to this is getting out of the way in all areas. So in areas where it has heavy control in the economy, in areas where it is not willing to sort of open the floodgates on investment for one political reason or another. And I think that the reason why that can be difficult is because I think it is a little bit of a cultural thing. Like we've talked about this before, Joel, it's the people who, this is going on in so many aspects and now I'm just dragging on, but I think that the culture dynamics are very interesting in today's day and age. Like people are sort of voting against their economic interests in favor for vibes in certain cohorts. And then other people are sort of voting against vibes and for their economic interests. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like we maybe just don't have a lot that's binding us together as a country in the way that nationalism in the past has for the United States. It's a long drawn out answer. I don't know if I'm
that does
anything,
touch on it, right? And I think that this budget doesn't do a fantastic job of letting our winners run, but that's largely because the proverbial ship that we're on, the political ship, doesn't turn as quickly as we'd like it to. And interestingly, I give Donald Trump props to this because for those that don't know what an Overton window is, he is the type of person that expands the Overton window, the things that we actually perceive as being possible that could happen. And it goes both directions, right? Like if you've got the worst things in the world could happen and some of the most outrageous and incredible things could be achieved. And this is me just bringing this up because it takes a certain type of politician to be able to turn a vote quickly. And I actually believe that this, call it 4-year period, is a generational moment where we have a paradigm shift technologically. We have the opportunity to change the way we have long treated carbon, and we'll call it like the environment, where we've, and in many circles, I don't know if anybody's recently read Bill Gates' the piece that he penned in the New York Times, where he talks about like CO2 and carbon capture is effectively solving climate change, a step function shift in what he has talked about over the last 15 years.
Just to interrupt you, Joel, I brought this up at dinner last night, and Brock, who obviously is not like super involved in politics, goes, "Oh, is that because Microsoft has a 30% stake in OpenAI, and we know how OpenAI functions?" I was like, "See, Brock, these are the insights we love."
Yeah, I mean, that is not an unfair criticism. But with that in mind, I actually generally give Bill Gates the benefit of the doubt with regards to his incentives. The guy doesn't need more money, doesn't care if Microsoft goes to infinity. I mean, he does and he doesn't. But the reality is that he was willing to put his reputation on the line. He's willing to change direction and change his opinion on things as technology has solved one thing that he has long called as being one of the most important challenges of our time. So this is all going into what I'm suggesting here, and that's we have an opportunity to change direction, to rotate the boat. Donald Trump has this ability he could turn the Titanic faster than most. And that's a function of how he is as a politician. And I'm not so certain Carney has that sort of talent or that sort of charisma or even control over his party, which is, I think, probably the number one thing that I would like to throw to you. And does he have the ability to, one, get this budget passed, and two, make big splashes? Does he have that sort of credibility at the moment? And does he have the votes to do it?
Yeah. So one thing on the Trump-Carney comparison when it comes to the ship analogy, Trump can change the ship because he can get the private sector. If we think of the private sector all having those like little engines that you like pop into the water, the number and sheer size of those engines that Trump has, he can play the political game and then stick those engines in the water, and then you're going whatever direction you want to go, like gangbusters. The problem with Canada is that we have oars, not little boat motors, if that makes sense. So yeah, definitely the political calculus happens in the same way of like, let's get everybody on board and go towards the direction. But definitely the capacity that you have internally to advance that direction is really important. And that, I would argue, is largely private sector driven. I think that when it comes to the political sort of calculus of this, Carney, earlier this week, Life Comes At You Fast, was 3 seats short of being able to get to the 172 seat number needed to pass this budget. And now he's 2 seats short because we had a Nova Scotia MP from the Conservative caucus cross the floor into the Liberal caucus. And then we've had a couple of other sort of musings of Conservatives either resigning or being rumored to cross the floor. Don't want to get too much into that, but I think that Carney is going to be able to pass this budget. The first sort of vote that we'll have on that, we've had some votes on amendments, but the first sort of vote that we will have that truly tests that, I think, will be the week of the 17th. They're on break next week. I don't see the NDP wanting this budget to fail. They can't go to an election. I don't see it as being out of the question that Carney can find a couple of other votes elsewhere. I don't know exactly where he'll find those votes, but it's just a matter as well of like a few people from other parties staying home and not voting either. So again, this becomes politically complicated when we look at the math, but I actually don't think that he'll be able to pass it. And I actually think that by the end of this session, Carney's going to be operating with an effective majority government, and we won't be going to the polls likely until 2029 on a 4-year schedule. Time will tell. Politics happens quickly, but that's sort of the tea leaves that as I'm reading the tea leaves, I don't think that we're going to have the kind of uncertainty that we thought might occur even just days ago.
I actually tend to agree with most of what you just said. I will like to now ask one more question. We just had a MP pull out locally.
Yep.
What does that mean for the Conservative Party it feels as though they're unraveling.
Yeah. So Matt Genereux in Edmonton Riverbend has said that he will be resigning his seat, but it's important to note he doesn't sit as an independent currently. He's still in the Conservative caucus. He will be resigning at some later date, according to his statement, so likely in the spring or something like that. And then there will be one last Conservative in the House, and there'll be a by-election in that seat. I would say that it's not a great look for the Conservatives. Like, the floor crossing itself was not great, even if you don't like floor crossings. The resignation, because there was like some surrounding gossip around it that it was actually going to be another floor crossing. But I mean, the member from Edmonton Riverbend, Matt Genereux, has said that that's not true. He's resigning for family reasons. So we'll take him at his word for that. I think that it just sort of signals the fragility of being in an opposition government when you're not dealing with a incompetent prime minister. Like Carney, I don't care how conservative you are, I don't care how, NDP you are, you can't sit at your desk and think that what we're seeing in Mark Carney isn't a shift in a positive direction from Trudeau. I'm not saying that Carney is going to be better and is going to fix things in the way that we need him to. I think that's yet to be determined. And I don't think that this budget is showing that he has a magic wand to do that. But most people are not looking at things that deeply. Most people are looking at what they see and the impressions they get. And I think that Carney gives that impression. It's important for us, people like us, to be diving into the details on that so people can really understand whether the signal and the noise are aligned. But I think that it's not a great look for the Conservatives. It is going to be an issue for Poilievre if it doesn't if this continues, like if there continues to be unrest. But I had mentioned, I did some media this morning about this, and I mentioned this morning, it's almost because of the fact that it seems like Carney's going into this more stable governing as a majority position. It's less an issue for the public than it is for internal members of parliament within the Conservative caucus. And Poilievre has a leadership review coming up in January. So it's almost like an internal matter for the party of, will party members and caucus continue to support him? And I think that if they do, that his leadership is not in trouble. I just don't think that the pressures are going to be external at this point. I think that the pressures are going to be internal, and it's going to be over inside baseball politics. Like, for example, there was a lot of allegations. The MP that ended up crossing the floor wanted to be deputy speaker. And, as the mechanics of politics go, that didn't happen for him. And so he was, sour grapes about it. I think that a lot of those types of issues, you didn't give me this opposition profile, or you treated me and my staff this way, or I didn't feel like I mattered to you in this way, that stuff is going to start to come to the surface. And it seems petty to people who are not involved in it, but it's very much like you have a CEO where when everything's going great, everybody loves the CEO. But when things aren't going great, we're talking about, I don't get enough of this. We're not doing this. We should be changing our strategy in this way. And so it's really hard to deal with those criticisms when you are not in government and should have been. Again, I don't necessarily agree with those criticisms, but I think just in terms of strategically how I see things shaking out, that's definitely a consideration I have in the back of my mind, which is if I were Poilievre, that sucks. That really sucks. Just like on a human level, like think of how things have changed even just from 12 months ago. Whatever your politics, that's a brutal feeling. And I do feel for Poilievre and the team, who I know work really hard to try and advance the interests of Canadians, which Canadians now agree with all of those interests because many of those themes are reflected by the Carney government, ironically. So anyway, I digress, but that's the political analysis I would share.
I mean, even in markets, like first movers often have all the arrows in their back. Instagram wasn't the first picture app.
Nope.
Google wasn't the first search app.
Nope.
So I would say that oftentimes having great ideas and being first comes down to timing more so than it comes down to your ideas being great. And the one thing I would add is that I'm just glad that those ideas are taking form, and
whoever's bringing them. Yep.
Could care less.
Yeah.
I don't care which party's in power. If they're red, blue, orange, or yellow, it makes no difference to me. I just want the country to go in a direction where we start to succeed a little bit more than we have in the past. 100%. Quite a bit more, actually. 100%. So, Mel, happy Friday. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes.
Have a good one.
You too. Take care. Thanks, Joel.
That's all for today. Thanks for listening. If you found this valuable, please subscribe and share it with a friend. As always, the information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered financial and/or tax advice. Please consult a licensed professional for your own personal situation. Joel is a registered portfolio manager and investment advisor, and clients of his and his firm may own securities discussed on this podcast.